Blanche Monnier. Born the 1st of March, year 1849, in Poitiers, a daughter of the provincial bourgeoisie, a young woman known for her beauty and for the quiet promise of a comfortable life. Yet the name that survives is not the salon or the gown. It is a name stained by darkness, la séquestrée de Poitiers, the confined woman of Poitiers. This is the story of how a life of privilege became a quarter-century of imprisonment, inside a house where the world moved on outside, while daylight never entered. It begins in year 1876. Blanche was 27 when she fell in love with Victor Calmel, an older lawyer from Poitiers. Calmel was not the man her mother envisioned. Louise Monnier, proud conservative, status-conscious, saw him as ill-suited, a penniless lawyer, unworthy to join their household. When Blanche announced plans to marry for love, the household's comfortable order cracked. The family, fearful of scandal and determined to preserve reputation, chose a punishment that was unthinkable in a city of salons and afternoon teas. Instead of dialogue or exile, Blanche's resistance was met with secrecy. According to contemporary reports, her mother and brother took her to an upstairs room, bolted the shutters, padlocked the door, and told society that Blanche had vanished, or worse, that she had died. Friends, neighbors, acquaintances were left with a rumor. The servants who attended the house knew something of the truth. But in a household where power and silence kept company, the secret stayed inside the walls. For the city's polite world, a daughter had disappeared. For Blanche, disappearance became a slow annihilation. From year 1876 until 23 May, year 1901, 25 years, Blanche Monnier lived inside an attic room that saw no Sunday. The shutters were kept chained. Meals were slid under the door. Sanitation was absent. Over decades, her hair, never cut, fell in tangled lengths. Her nails thickened and overgrew. The mattress rotted beneath her. What remained of her body wasted away, until she was described by the police as squelettique, a living skeleton of roughly 25 kilograms. The attic became a tomb of odors, insects, and filth. Those facts were captured in official reports and reported across newspapers that could hardly believe such cruelty had gone on in full view of a respectable house. What unravels such a long secret? It was an anonymous letter. On 23 May, year 1901, a missive reached the Paris Attorney General's office. There is a woman locked in Madame Monnier's house, half-starved, living on putrid litter for the past 25 years, in a word, in her own filth. The writer's identity would never be confirmed, but the authorities took the allegation seriously and sent Commissioner Boucheton and police to the Monnier home in Poitiers. The officers arrived that afternoon and demanded to search. Resistance met the knock. The household tried to hold the line. But the law, once engaged, follows its own momentum. The heavy chain and padlock came away. The shutters were forced open. And for the first time in 25 years, sunlight entered that attic room. What the police found shocked even hardened officers. Lying on a rotten straw mattress, naked and bound, was Blanche. She was surrounded by a crust of excrement, decaying food, oyster shells, and crawling insects. A thin, filthy figure blinked up at the light she had not known in a quarter-century. Her hair hung past her ankles. Her body was wasted to a fraction of its former shape. The smell reportedly made the officers reel. They carried her out and rushed her to the Hôtel Dieu in Poitiers. The photograph that later circulated Blanche propped up on a hospital bed, hair unkempt, eyes distant, became an emblem of the story, a visual proof that a respectable house could hide a monstrous truth. Once the secret flew into the open, the reaction was immediate and unambiguous. Outrage. Newspapers across France and abroad seized the story. L'Illustration and other illustrated weeklies printed Blanche's portrait and recounted the sordid scene. Crowds gathered outside the Monnier house. Neighbors who had once walked past and heard nothing now felt complicit. The press asked, as did an outraged public, how could a family that hosted parties and kept up appearances have allowed such a thing to go on in their home? The answers were complicated, but they exposed a brutal mixture of pride, fear, and the social codes of the age. Legal action followed. Louise Monnier, the mother, was arrested the day of the raid and charged with unlawful confinement and violence. The story of the tyrannical mother in possession of reputation and power fit the public's appetite for drama. Louise, old and reportedly ill, protested that Blanche was insane and that she and the household had no recourse but to hide her, a grotesque rationalization that tried to turn criminal concealment into compassionate secrecy. Within weeks of her arrest, Louise took ill in custody and died before she could be tried, reportedly from a stroke or similar collapse. The dramatic end allowed only a partial accounting of responsibility. Marcel Monnier, Blanche's brother, faced prosecution too. Prosecutors argued he was complicit, having provided the room, allowed the locks, and kept silent. At the Poitiers Correctional Court, he was convicted and given a sentence of 15 months. The verdict satisfied some of the public's hunger for retribution. Yet Marcel appealed. And on appeal, the conviction was overturned. Not because sympathy for the crime had returned, but because French criminal law at the time did not clearly punish omission. The penal code then in force left a legal gap. The law required active violence, and failure to act, even when a relative is clearly in peril, was not always criminally prosecutable. Marcel walked free. The law had caught up to only part of the moral outrage. But the legal questions, though urgent, were not the only tragedy. Blanche herself had endured damage that would not be cured by a court's verdict. Medical and psychiatric reports, after her rescue, described severe and persistent harm. Prolonged starvation, sensory deprivation. The trauma of total social isolation had deeply affected her mind and body. Doctors diagnosed chronic psychosis and severe eating disorders, among other conditions. Contemporary observers noted that Blanche seemed unable to form normal speech, and her capacity to reintegrate into the world she had been snatched from was minimal. For the remainder of her life, she lived in institutions. First treated at hospitals, later transferred to an asylum in Blois, where she would spend her final years. She died on the 13th of October, year 1913, at age 64. Still a tragic figure of a life hollowed out by the cruelty of those who once claimed to care for her. The obituary notices were brief. The scandal had become an object lesson in the newspapers and novels of the time. André Gide and several later writers drew on the case to critique the hypocrisy of bourgeois morality, the dangerous mingling of respectability and secrecy. Blanche's name remained as a warning. Reputation may be preserved, but at what human cost? Why did no one stop it earlier? That question echoes in headlines and in the testimony of neighbors, servants, and local officials. Some neighbors later admitted they had heard screams or suspected something, but a culture of deference and a conviction that the family knew best kept gossip from becoming action. Others said the household insisted she was mad, and madness in that era carried stigma so heavy people preferred to believe an unfortunate family's private misfortune rather than pry. Two maids who tended Blanche later testified they thought she was incurable, and that there was nothing to be done beyond slipping bread under a door. The truth is harsher. Silence shielded cruelty. Social hierarchies made intervention improbable. Historians have debated motive. While the love for Victor Calmel is often cited as the spark, other elements likely contributed. Fear of scandal, political differences. The Monniers were conservative, Calmel a Republican, and perhaps psychological issues within the family itself. Some modern researchers argue that Blanche may have had pre-existing mental health struggles that the family used as justification for confinement. Others insist that whatever the motive, the willful neglect and deception cannot be excused. Whatever the inner dynamics, the effect was the same. A woman's life was sacrificed to a family's reputation. The photograph that circulated after year 1901, Blanche on a hospital bed, hair uncut, eyes hollowed, became an image people could not forget. It fixed the narrative in the public imagination. People came to the Monnier house to see the closed shutters. Tourists visited, as if viewing a shrine of scandal. The city of Poitiers had its curiosity transformed into a kind of morbid pilgrimage. Newspapers reprinted the police descriptions. Rotting mattress, maggots, the smell, the crust of filth. Such grisly details lit a fire under reformers and the morally outraged alike. But did the rescue change laws? The Monnier case exposed a lacuna in legal protections against omission and spurred a conversation about duties to rescue and the responsibilities of family members and the state. France's law on failure to assist a person in danger would only be strengthened in the years after. But for Blanche, those reforms came too late. The legal reform that might have made Marcel criminally liable under a duty to rescue principle was not yet in place when the appeals court overturned his conviction. The case remains an example of how social outrage can collide with legal technicalities. Blanche's life after rescue is quieter on paper, but no less poignant. Institutionalized in Blois, she was given basic care, but never fully regained her health or autonomy. She would spend 12 more years in a psychiatric hospital before death closed the book on a life that had been so brutally curtailed. Her case, however, lived on, in literature, in law, and in the popular imagination. Scholars revisiting the story in later decades have tried to tease apart the motives and to understand how a cultured family could perpetrate such an offense. The answers remain partial. What is undeniable is the human toll. We close with the questions that the Monnier affair leaves us. How many injustices persist inside walls we pass every day? How often do respectability and shame conspire to hide cruelty? Blanche Monnier was not only a victim of a particular family's cruelty, she was the casualty of a culture that prized appearances over the vulnerable human life inside. Her story forces us to examine the price of silence and to ask what interventions we owe to one another in a humane society. So you watched it complete. Your every friend must know this story, so share it as much as possible. Thank you for watching this documentary on Blanche Monnier, the Séquestrée de Poitiers. If this account moved you, share it. Not to revel in horror, but to remember that behind closed doors, real lives can be crushed. Remember her as a caution and as a call. When suspicion whispers, act. When shame silences, speak. When a reputation is at stake, put justice and compassion before appearances.